At 18, Mara Ellison had $23, one backpack, an old dog named Scout, and nowhere left to call home. 3 days after her birthday, her stepmother put her belongings outside, locked the door behind her, and told her she was old enough to figure life out on her own. With a winter storm moving toward the Appalachian Mountains and barely enough money for food, Mara did something everyone at the county auction thought was ridiculous. She spent $5 on an abandoned mountain cabin no one else wanted. The roof sagged, the windows were broken, there was no electricity, no working heat, and the road leading to it was almost gone. When the auctioneer heard her $5 bid, he laughed. Someone in the back muttered that she wouldn't last a week up there. Mara didn't care. $5 had bought her 4 walls, and 4 walls were more than she had that morning. But on her first freezing night inside the cabin, as snow began burying the mountain road and Mara struggled to keep a weak fire alive, Scout suddenly walked to the old stone fireplace and froze. He sniffed one particular stone, growled, and began clawing at the ash-covered floor. Mara pulled him away. He went straight back. Then one of the stones shifted beneath his paws. Mara knelt beside him, cleared away decades of soot, and tapped the stone with the handle of a screwdriver. The sound beneath it was hollow. She pried it loose and reached into the darkness below the fireplace until her fingers touched something cold and metallic, something that had apparently been hidden there for decades. When Mara finally pulled it into the firelight and saw what was written on it, she had no idea that this $5 cabin was about to reveal why her mother had never spoken about this mountain, what her grandfather had done during one deadly Appalachian blizzard, and why people Mara had never met owed their lives to the place everyone else had called worthless. But before we go back to the morning Mara lost her home, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Wherever you are and whatever time you're joining us, I hope you have a wonderful day or a peaceful night ahead. And if you enjoy emotional stories about forgotten places, family secrets, and ordinary people discovering that their lives mean more than they imagine, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because what Scout found beneath that fireplace was only the beginning. 3 days after her 18th birthday, Mara Ellison stood on the front porch of the only home she had ever known and watched her stepmother set a black duffel bag beside her feet. "That's everything," Vanessa said. Mara stared at the bag. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a winter coat, underwear, toiletries, and the framed photograph of her parents that had once sat beside her bed. 18 years, reduced to something she could carry over one shoulder. Scout stood pressed against her leg, the aging shepherd mix watching Vanessa through the half-open door. "Dad said I could stay here," Mara said, saying it hurt more than she expected. Daniel Ellison had been dead less than 2 months. During his illness, he had worried constantly about Mara finishing school and having somewhere safe to live. Vanessa folded her arms. "Your father said a lot of things before he died. The house is mine now, and I'm selling it. I just turned 18. Exactly." Mara waited for something else, for hesitation, guilt, perhaps even an apology. Vanessa only reached for the door. "You're old enough to figure things out." The lock clicked after it closed. Mara stood motionless until Scout nudged her hand. She looked down at him and forced herself to move. In her pocket were $23 and some change. Her old Subaru sat at the curb, still carrying Daniel's faded parking permit on the windshield. Mara loaded her bag into the back, opened the passenger door for Scout, and drove away without looking at the house again. That night they slept in the Subaru behind a 24-hour grocery store. Mara curled beneath her coat while Scout occupied the passenger seat, occasionally raising his head whenever someone crossed the parking lot. The temperature dropped below freezing. Mara started the engine twice for heat, terrified of wasting gasoline. At dawn, she turned the key again. The engine clicked. She tried once more. Click. Come on! Nothing. Mara rested her forehead against the steering wheel. $23. No home. Now no working car. Scout leaned across the console and licked her cheek. Yeah, she whispered. I know. By mid-morning, Mara was sitting inside the county library because it was warm and nobody required her to buy anything. Scout had to remain outside near the disabled Subaru, wrapped in an old blanket Mara had found in the trunk. She searched public computers for shelters, temporary work, and cheap rooms. Even the cheapest motel would consume nearly everything she had in one night. A notice taped beside the printer caught her attention. County tax property auction today. Mara almost ignored it. Property belonged to people with savings accounts, jobs, and functioning cars. But near the bottom of the printed list was an entry marked differently from the others. Abandoned mountain cabin access uncertain, no active utilities. She read the location twice. It was high in the Appalachian Mountains outside town. The photograph showed a crooked wooden structure surrounded by bare trees. It looked terrible. It also had 4 walls. An hour later, Mara sat in the back row of a county meeting room while properties were called one after another. Houses sold for thousands. Parcels of land drew several bidders. When the mountain cabin appeared on the screen, the room went quiet. The auctioneer mentioned delinquent taxes already handled through the county process, uncertain road access, structural deterioration, and no guarantee of functioning utilities. Opening bid, $100. Nobody moved. 50, silence. Someone chuckled. The auctioneer sighed. $10, still nothing. Mara felt the $23 in her pocket. This was absurd. She knew nothing about cabins. She knew nothing about mountains, yet $10 was less than a motel room. $5, the auctioneer finally said, clearly eager to move on. Anyone? Mara raised her hand. Several people turned around. The auctioneer blinked. $5? Yes. A man 2 rows ahead laughed. Hope she likes bears, another voice said. That place isn't worth the hike. Heat climbed Mara's face, but she kept her hand raised. No competing bid came. The auctioneer shook his head and brought down the gavel. Sold, $5 by early afternoon. Mara had paperwork. $18 left, and a mountain cabin she had never seen. Getting there was harder, with the Subaru dead. She took what she could carry and walked with Scout. The paved road became gravel, then a narrow mountain track climbing through thick forest. Clouds gathered over the ridges. After nearly 2 miles, Mara saw the cabin. Her hopes sank. One corner of the roof sagged. A window was broken. The porch leaned enough that she tested each board before stepping on it. Inside smelled of damp wood, dust, and cold stone. There was no electricity when she tried the switches. The old heating system did nothing. But against the far wall stood a large stone fireplace. Mara touched its blackened hearth. We can work with that. Scout wagged his tail once. She found dry scraps beneath the porch and enough old wood stacked against an interior wall to start a small fire. As darkness came, wind moved through gaps around the window frame. Mara used cardboard and part of Scout's old blanket to block the worst opening. A battery radio left in the Subaru emergency kit crackled beside her. The weather report made her stop working. A winter storm was moving across the Appalachian region. Heavy snow would begin overnight, with dangerous wind and rapidly falling temperatures at higher elevations. Mara looked toward the dark windows. Perfect. She fed another piece of wood into the fireplace. The flame was weak, but it was heat. For the first time since Vanessa had locked the door, Mara allowed herself to think that perhaps she had survived the worst part. She had shelter. Nobody could throw her out tonight. Scout, who had been lying beside her, suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the fireplace. When he stood and approached the hearth, instead of watching the flames, he sniffed along the stones at the edge of the floor. Then he growled. Mara sat upright. Scout! He scratched at one soot-darkened stone. Mara pulled him back, but he immediately returned and dug harder. His claws scraped stone with a sharp, repetitive sound. Stop! You'll hurt yourself. She reached for his collar. Scout struck the same spot again. This time, the stone shifted. Mara froze. She moved Scout aside and brushed away the ash. The stone was slightly different from the others. Its mortar cracked around the edges. She tapped it with the metal handle of her screwdriver. The sound that came back was not the solid knock she expected. It was hollow. Outside, the first snow began tapping against the broken window. Mara stared at the fireplace, then tapped the stone again. Hollow. There was empty space beneath it. Mara kept the screwdriver against the loose stone for another moment, listening to the wind push through the trees outside. Every instinct told her to pry it up immediately. But a gust struck the cabin hard enough to rattle the broken window. Snow blew through a gap in the cardboard she had wedged across it. Scout turned from the fireplace toward the sound. Whatever's under there can wait, Mara said. The fire could not. She had only a small stack of usable wood, and much of what she had found beneath the porch was damp. She separated the driest pieces, fed 2 into the flames, then searched the cabin for anything that might help seal the window. An old cupboard yielded newspapers, brittle with age. She stuffed them around the cardboard and pushed a chair against it. The result looked ridiculous. But the draft weakened. The radio warned that snowfall would intensify through the evening. Higher elevations could receive more than a foot. With wind making travel dangerous, Mara looked at her shrinking woodpile. She had shelter, but shelter without heat could still kill her. She put on her coat and stepped outside with Scout. Snow already covered the porch. They searched beneath the trees nearest the cabin, collecting fallen branches that were dry enough under their bark to burn. Mara's fingers quickly became numb despite her gloves. Scout stayed close, occasionally plunging his nose into the snow before looking back at her. After 3 trips, Mara had enough wood for several hours if she burned it carefully. She was carrying the last armful toward the porch when an engine sounded below the cabin. Mara stopped. Scout stiffened. Through the trees appeared a dark ATV climbing the narrow track. An older man in a heavy brown coat drove it, slowing when he saw her. His gray beard was crusted with snow. "You the one who bought this place?" he called. Mara tightened her grip on the wood. "Who's asking?" The man switched off the engine. "Elias Boone. I live down near the county road. Used to maintain these mountain roads." He glanced at the sky. "Saw tracks coming up here. Figured nobody with sense would be hiking this way before tonight. Apparently that's me." Elias studied her for a second, then noticed Scout. "You alone?" "I have him." Scout gave a low, warning sound. "I can see that." Elias remained beside the ATV instead of approaching. Mara appreciated that. "Storm's going to get worse," he said. "Road below the switchback drifts shut first. Once it does, you may be here until somebody clears it." "I'm staying." His eyes moved toward the cabin. "Got heat? Fireplace? That chimney hasn't been used in years." Mara's confidence weakened. "It's drawing." "For now." Elias looked at the broken window. "You'll lose half your heat through there." He opened a small cargo box on the ATV and pulled out a hammer, nails, and a piece of plywood strapped to the rear rack. was taking this home. You need it more. Mara hesitated. She disliked owing strangers anything. Her father had taught her that accepting help was not the same as weakness. But since his death, every favor seemed to come with conditions. Elias apparently read something in her expression. It's scrap plywood, not a marriage proposal. Mara almost smiled. Okay. Together they covered the broken window. Elias made Mara hold the board while he drove the first nails, then handed her the hammer. Your cabin. You finish it. She did. Her blows were awkward at first, then steadier when they went inside. Elias crouched near the fireplace and checked the draft. Scout immediately returned to the loose hearthstone. Scout, leave it. Elias looked over. What's he after? I don't know. He keeps scratching there. Mara tapped the stone. The hollow sound came again. Elias's expression changed briefly, but before she could ask about it, he stood and examined the chimney opening. Keep the fire small tonight. Better steady than big. If the chimney starts smoking into the room, put it out. Mara nodded. You always check abandoned cabins before storms? Only when somebody buys one for $5. She looked at him sharply. Elias smiled. Small town. He walked toward the door, then paused. What's your name? Mara Ellison. Family around here, not anymore. Your parents? My dad was Daniel Ellison. My mother was Claire. Claire Ellison. Elias stopped with one hand on the door. For the first time since arriving, the practical calm disappeared from his face. Claire. You knew her? He looked around the cabin, then back at Mara. What did you say her maiden name was? Mara frowned. I didn't. Silence held between them. Elias seemed to realize what he had revealed. He pulled his gloves tighter. Storm's coming fast. We can talk when the road opens. Wait, did you know my mother? Keep that fire alive. Elias. But he stepped outside, started the ATV, and disappeared down the mountain before Mara could stop him. By nightfall, the storm had swallowed the track completely. Snow struck the plywood in waves. Mara rationed the wood as Elias had instructed, adding one piece at a time. The cabin remained cold, but the area near the hearth was bearable. Scout lay beside her until suddenly his head rose again. He walked directly to the loose stone. You really aren't giving this up, are you? Mara took the screwdriver. Elias's strange reaction to her mother had left her too restless to sleep. She scraped old mortar from the edges of the stone. It took nearly 20 minutes before she could wedge the screwdriver beneath it. She pushed down. Nothing. She repositioned it and pushed harder. The stone lifted a fraction. Scout began pawing beside her. Back. Mara worked her fingers under the edge and pulled. The stone came free with a gritty scrape. Beneath it was a narrow black cavity. Cold air touched her fingers. She aimed her flashlight inside but could see only dust and stone. Mara reached down carefully. Nothing. She stretched farther until her shoulder pressed against the hearth. Her fingertips touched something smooth and cold. Metal. She hooked 2 fingers around an edge and dragged it toward the opening. A small tin box emerged. Blackened by age and coated in gray dust, 2 faded letters had been scratched into the lid. S.H. Mara stared at them. She had no idea who S.H. was. Scout sniffed the box while Mara worked open the rusted latch. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with string. She chose the top one. The paper trembled slightly in her cold fingers as she unfolded it. The handwriting was faded but readable. Dear Samuel, Mara whispered. Her eyes moved to the next line. My family would not have survived that night without you. She read the sentence twice. Then she turned the letter over and saw the address written beneath the signature. Mara slowly looked around the dark cabin, then back at the page. It was the same mountain address printed on the $5 auction paperwork in her backpack. Mara sat cross-legged beside the fireplace, with the $10 between her knees, while the storm pressed against the cabin. Scout rested against her hip, warm and solid, as if he understood she needed him close. The first letter lay open in her hands. She read it again, slower this time. Dear Samuel, my family would not have survived that night without you. The writer mentioned a storm but gave few details. There was a line thanking Samuel for keeping the fire burning, another about children finally becoming warm enough to sleep, and a promise that the writer would never forget what Samuel had done. Mara checked the date. February 1994. She untied the remaining envelopes. There were more than a dozen. Most were addressed simply to Samuel Hale at the cabin's mountain address. One thanked him for going back out on the road. Another mentioned the children by the fire. A third contained only a few paragraphs, but one sentence caught Mara's attention. Every time snow falls, I remember that cabin and the man who opened the door. Mara looked toward the weather-beaten walls around her. The place she had bought because nobody else wanted it had once mattered deeply to these people. But why? None of the letters explained the whole story. Each writer seemed to assume Samuel already knew exactly what had happened. Mara searched deeper in the box. Beneath the letters was a photograph. A broad-shouldered man stood on the cabin porch, one hand resting against the railing. He appeared to be in his 50s, with dark hair turning gray and a serious expression softened by a slight smile. The cabin behind him looked different: straight roof, intact windows, stacked firewood along the wall. Mara turned the photograph over. Written in blue ink were 4 words and a date. Samuel Hale, summer 1994. Her breath caught. Hale. She knew that name. Her mother had been Claire Hale before marrying Daniel Ellison. Mara stared at the photograph, searching the stranger's face for something familiar. The eyes stopped her. She had seen those eyes in old photographs of Claire, and sometimes in her own reflection. Samuel Hale, she whispered. Scout raised his head. Mara remembered asking about her grandparents when she was younger. Her father had told her Claire's parents were gone, but Claire herself had rarely spoken about them before her death. Mara had been 6 when she lost her mother. What remained were fragments: Claire singing while washing dishes, the smell of her hand lotion, the way she tucked blankets beneath Mara's chin. Nothing about a cabin, nothing about Samuel, nothing about these mountains. Mara held the photograph closer to the firelight. I think he was my grandfather. Saying it aloud made the cabin feel suddenly smaller. A gust struck the wall. The flames bent sharply, and smoke curled into the room. Mara coughed and scrambled upright. The chimney! She remembered Elias's warning and reduced the fire immediately. Shifting the wood until the smoke began drawing upward again, the practical problem returned with cruel simplicity. History could wait. Cold could not. Her woodpile was nearly gone. By morning, the snowfall had weakened, but the world outside had disappeared beneath white. Mara opened the door and found snow banked against the porch. She spent the next hour collecting branches from beneath evergreens and digging out pieces of wood she had noticed the previous day. Some were damp. She carried them inside anyway and stacked them near the hearth to dry. Her gloves were soaked by the time she finished. Scout shook snow across the floor. Thanks, Mara said. He wagged his tail. She was feeding another branch into the fire when she heard an engine through the trees. Elias's ATV emerged slowly along the buried track. He had a small bundle of dry firewood strapped behind him. Mara stepped onto the porch before he could dismount. "You knew him?" Elias looked at her. "Morning to you too." Mara held up the photograph. His expression answered before his words did. Elias removed his gloves. "Haven't seen his face in a long time. He was my grandfather, wasn't he?" "If Claire was your mother." "Yes." Mara felt anger rise beneath her confusion. "Yesterday you acted like you barely knew anything." "I said we'd talk when the road opened." "It hasn't opened." Elias glanced at the snow. "Fair point." He carried the wood inside, and Mara let him because she needed it. Scout sniffed his boots before settling near the fireplace. Elias stared at the open tin box. "Where did you find that?" "Under the hearth." He crouched but did not touch the letters. "Samuel kept things." "What happened here?" Mara asked. "People wrote that he saved them. They mentioned children, a road, a storm. One says he went back outside." Elias remained quiet. "You know what they mean." "Some of it." "Then tell me." He looked toward the fire. There was a bad blizzard in '94. Roads disappeared under snow faster than crews could clear them. People got stranded up here. And Samuel was here. That's not an answer. Elias met her eyes. "It's the part I know firsthand. The rest belongs to people who were inside this cabin that night." Mara wanted to push him, but something in his voice stopped her. It was not secrecy for the pleasure of withholding information. It sounded more like respect. Elias nodded toward the photograph. Samuel wasn't a man who talked much about what he did for people. "Why didn't my mother tell me about him?" "That I can't answer." He stood and added wood to the stack. "But around here, years ago, some people had a name for Samuel." Mara waited. "The man who kept the mountain alive." The words stayed with her after Elias left. By afternoon, the sky had brightened enough for Mara to examine the box again. She removed every envelope, arranging them carefully beside the hearth. At the bottom was something she had missed, a folded piece of heavier paper wedged beneath the lining. Mara pulled it free. It was not a complete document. The right half had been torn away. The paper carried faded legal language, a parcel description she could barely understand, and several typed names. Then she saw one she recognized. Claire Hale, her mother. Mara moved closer to the window for better light. Near the bottom, a surviving line began with 3 words. She read them once, then again. Transfer of ownership. The sentence ended exactly where the missing half of the document had been torn away. 2 days after the storm, the lower mountain road was finally passable. Elias stopped by shortly after sunrise and told Mara the county plow had cleared enough snow for vehicles to reach town, though the upper track remained rough. Mara wrapped the letters and torn document in a plastic grocery bag, tucked them into her backpack, and left Scout at the cabin with food and water near the fireplace. Elias drove her down on his ATV, refusing to accept the few dollars she offered for gas. "Save it," he said. "You've got windows to fix." The county records office occupied the first floor of an old brick building beside the courthouse. Mara arrived expecting the torn document to solve everything. Instead, the clerk studied it through reading glasses and shook her head. "This isn't enough. My mother's name is on it. Part of her name is on part of a document." The clerk turned the page carefully. "We need the complete instrument, recording information, or something that identifies when and how it was filed." Mara showed her the auction paperwork. The clerk searched the parcel number. The cabin's record was worse than Mara expected. Samuel Hale appeared in older tax entries. Later records contained inconsistent references to an estate, years of unpaid taxes, and no clear modern deed showing Claire as recorded owner. Eventually, the property had entered the county's delinquent property process, and ended up in the auction where Mara bought it for $5. "So, did my mother own it?" Mara asked. "I can't tell you that from this." "Then who did?" "That's the problem." The clerk rotated the monitor slightly. "The chain isn't clean." Mara stared at rows of dates that meant almost nothing to her. Yesterday. The words transfer of ownership had felt like a door opening. Now she understood that half a document could create more questions than answers. Where do I look? Historical records, old deeds, probate files, possibly. You could also try the library archives. Mara walked outside with the torn page still in her backpack and considerably less certainty than when she had entered. The public library felt different now. 2 days earlier, she had entered it homeless and looking for somewhere warm. Today she came searching for the history of a house she technically owned, but might somehow have belonged to her family long before she paid $5 for it. At the reference desk, Mara asked about local newspapers from 1994. The woman behind the desk looked at the photograph Mara carried. She was in her 70s, with silver hair cut neatly at her jaw and a name badge reading Ruth Calder. "Where did you get this?" Ruth asked. "The cabin." Ruth looked up. "Samuel Hale's cabin? You knew him too?" "I knew who he was." Ruth studied Mara's face. "And you are Mara Ellison." "Claire Hale was my mother." Recognition softened Ruth's expression. "Claire's daughter." Mara was becoming tired of strangers knowing pieces of her family that she had never been told. "I'm trying to understand what happened there in 1994. Ruth led her to the archive machines. Together they searched February issues from that year. After nearly 40 minutes, Mara found a headline: "Blizzard Strands Motorists in Mountain County." She leaned toward the screen. The article described heavy snowfall, blocked roads, abandoned vehicles, and emergency crews struggling to reach higher elevations. Then, just as it began describing rescue efforts near Samuel's Mountain Road, the image became unreadable. A dark, damaged strip consumed the remainder of the column. Mara advanced to the next frame. Different page. She went backward and tried again. Nothing. "That can't be all of it." Ruth adjusted the machine. "The microfilm is damaged." "Is there another copy?" "Not here." Mara sat back, frustrated. Once again she had found half an answer. She showed Ruth several letters. Ruth read only the portions Mara offered, careful not to unfold anything unnecessarily. "These people all wrote to Samuel after the storm," Mara said. "Elias Boone said some people called him the man who kept the mountain alive." Ruth gave a faint smile. That sounds like something people would have said afterward. After what Ruth considered the question. "I wasn't at the cabin that night. I won't pretend I was. But I remember the months afterward. People brought supplies up that mountain. Lumber, food, roofing material." "Why?" "Because Samuel had helped people, and people wanted to help him back. How many people, I don't know." Mara looked again at the ruined newspaper image. "Everyone keeps knowing just enough to tell me there's more. That's usually how local history survives." Ruth said, "Pieces in different hands." Before Mara left, Ruth wrote down several archive references and suggested older county probate indexes that might contain Samuel's name. It was not an answer, but it was a direction. Elias met Mara near the lower road late that afternoon, on the ride back up. Mara kept thinking about the cabin as it appeared in Samuel's photograph, repaired, cared for, surrounded by stacked wood. When she reached it, Scout greeted her so enthusiastically that he nearly knocked the backpack from her shoulder. "Missed you too." The fire had burned low but survived. Mara fed it wood and sat on the floor beside Scout. Her phone had enough signal near one window to show several missed calls. All were from Vanessa. Mara considered ignoring them. Then the phone rang again. She answered. "What? Where are you?" Vanessa asked. "Why do you care? I heard you bought some property." Mara looked around the cabin. News travels fast. A condemned shack on a mountain. Mara, what were you thinking? I needed somewhere to live? Silence followed. Vanessa did not apologize. You wasted your money. $5? It's still ridiculous. Mara almost ended the call. Then she remembered Elias's reaction and Ruth recognizing the photograph. Did Dad ever tell you about Samuel Hale? Vanessa stopped speaking. The silence was immediate and unmistakable. Mara sat straighter. Vanessa? Where did you hear that name? So you know it? Mara, answer me. He was Mom's father. Another pause. What exactly are you doing up there? Vanessa asked. Her voice no longer sounded dismissive. Trying to find out why nobody told me this cabin belonged to my grandfather. Who told you that? I found things. What things? Mara looked toward the tin box beside the hearth. Letters, a photograph, part of a document with Mom's name on it. Vanessa inhaled sharply. What kind of document? Why? Because you don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it. Your father had old papers from Claire. He never sorted them properly. Did he know about this cabin? Vanessa did not answer. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. Did Dad know I'm not discussing this over the phone? You called me. Because you're 18 and apparently digging through property records without understanding what they mean? You made sure I had to figure things out. Remember? The words landed harder than Mara intended. Vanessa's voice became cold. Don't turn this into something it isn't. You threw me out, and now you own a $5 cabin. Congratulations. Mara gripped the phone. At least nobody can lock me out of it. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Vanessa said quietly, Listen to me. Whatever you found in that cabin belonged to your mother, not you. The call ended before Mara could answer. Mara stared at the dark phone screen long after Vanessa ended the call. Scout lifted his head from beside the hearth and watched her. Apparently none of this belongs to me, Mara said. The words sounded bitter even to her. She set the phone down and looked at the letters. Photograph and torn document spread across the floor. If Vanessa knew about Claire's papers, then Daniel had known something too. That possibility hurt more than Mara expected. Her father had spent years telling her that family meant telling the truth, even when it was difficult. Yet he had never once mentioned Samuel Hale, the cabin, or a document transferring ownership to Claire. By morning, anger had replaced confusion. Vanessa called again shortly after 8. Mara almost let it ring out, then answered. What old papers did Dad have? She asked before Vanessa could speak. Good morning to you too. You said he had papers from Mom? Vanessa sighed. After Claire died, Daniel kept boxes of her things. Most of it sat in the attic for years. Did he know about this cabin? A pause. He knew there had been property in Claire's family. That's not what I asked. He mentioned a mountain cabin once or twice. Mara closed her eyes. Once or twice, Mara. It was an abandoned place nobody had used in years. He knew it might belong to Mom. He said it should have gone to you someday. The sentence left Mara silent. Vanessa continued, quieter now. He also said the title was a mess and the taxes were years behind. He never explained the details. Why didn't he tell me? Maybe because you were a child? Maybe because he thought he could fix it before you needed to know? And did he? Obviously not. Mara gripped the phone. You knew enough to ask what I found. I knew there were old family documents, that's all. And now you suddenly care? Vanessa's tone hardened. I care because if Claire's property became part of Daniel's estate, you can't just decide everything in that cabin is yours because you paid $5 at an auction. Mara felt the same old anger rise, but underneath it was fear. "Are you saying you're going to try to take it?" "I'm saying neither of us knows what those papers mean yet. You threw me out 3 days after my birthday. Don't make every conversation about that. It changed every conversation." Vanessa went quiet. Mara ended the call first. The silence afterward felt cleaner. She folded Claire's torn document carefully and returned it to the tin box. The letters remained. One envelope near the bottom caught her attention because the handwriting was different from the others. The return address was faint, but the name on the front was unmistakable. Samuel Hale. The letter inside had not been written to him. It had been written by Claire. Mara sat closer to the fire and unfolded it. Claire had been young when she wrote it, probably not much older than Mara was now. The letter was ordinary at first. Claire complained about work, apologized for not visiting, and teased Samuel about refusing to replace an old kitchen chair. Mara smiled before she could stop herself. Her mother had once been someone's daughter, impatient and affectionate and alive in a way Mara had never been old enough to understand. Then the tone shifted. Claire wrote that she could not stay on the mountain forever. She wanted a different life. She knew Samuel believed the cabin mattered, but she was tired of hearing people talk about the storm as if one terrible night had defined their family forever. She ended by writing, "I know you did what you thought was right. I just don't want the mountain to decide who I have to become." Mara read the line twice. It was the closest she had come to hearing Claire's real voice in 12 years. Not the mother from fading memories, but a young woman trying to leave home without stopping loving the man who remained there. Scout placed his chin on Mara's knee. "She left too." Mara whispered, "Just differently." A knock sounded at the door. Mara startled, then recognized Elias through the window. He entered carrying a length of stovepipe brush and a small toolbox. "Chimney day," he said. "Unless you'd rather fill the cabin with smoke." Mara showed him Claire's letter. Elias did not read it. "That yours? My mother wrote it." "Then it's yours to read." He moved toward the fireplace. Mara watched him inspect the chimney opening. Did Samuel and Claire fight about this place? Probably. Parents and children usually find something. "That's not an answer." Elias looked back at her. "I didn't know Claire well enough to tell you what happened between them." Mara appreciated the refusal more than another half-truth. He handed her the brush. "You're doing the first pass." "Why me?" "Your chimney." They worked for nearly 2 hours. Soot fell in black sheets onto the hearth. Mara coughed, cursed, and nearly dropped the brush twice. Elias corrected her grip, but never took over. When they finished, the draft was noticeably stronger. Mara stood back, exhausted and streaked with soot. Elias nodded. "Better. That's all I get. You want a medal?" For the first time since Vanessa's call, Mara laughed. It came out unexpectedly and disappeared almost as quickly. But Elias smiled. "There she is." Mara's expression changed. "Dad used to say that." Elias did not respond, and she was grateful. They spent the rest of the afternoon checking loose boards near the back wall and clearing storm debris from around the cabin. Mara began to see the place differently. Not as a ruin she had bought out of desperation, but as something that could be repaired one task at a time. A nail here, a draft sealed there, a chimney cleaned. Progress small enough not to frighten her. Scout followed them outside, nose down in the melting snow. Near the collapsed woodshed behind the cabin, he stopped suddenly. "Not again," Mara said. Scout sniffed around a fallen beam and began pawing at the ground beside it. Elias moved closer. What's he got? Hopefully not another 20-year-old box. Mara crouched and brushed away wet leaves. Scout kept nosing the underside of the beam. Something had been carved into the wood, almost hidden beneath dirt. Mara wiped it clean. 2 initials appeared. S.H. Elias saw them too. Samuel. The woodshed had partially collapsed toward the rear. Its roof caved in under years of snow. Mara examined the floorboards beneath the beam. Most were warped gray wood, but one board looked different. Straighter, less weathered at the edges. She wedged her fingers beneath it and pulled. Nothing happened. Elias handed her a pry bar from his toolbox. Careful. Mara worked it under the board. Wood groaned. Scout paced beside her, tail stiff with interest. She pushed harder. The board lifted. Beneath it was a shallow compartment between the floor supports. Mara reached inside and felt coarse fabric. She pulled out a rectangular bundle wrapped tightly in old canvas. The material was damp at the edges, but still bound with twine. Elias crouched beside her. You want me to open it? Mara shook her head. No. She carried the bundle into the cabin, set it beside the fireplace, and cut the twine with her pocket knife. The canvas loosened around something flat and heavy. Mara folded back one corner, then another. Whatever Samuel had hidden there had been protected deliberately. She looked at Elias, then at Scout. Finally, she opened the canvas completely. The canvas fell open across the cabin floor. Mara had expected another legal document, perhaps even the missing half of the paper bearing Claire's name. Instead, she found a stack of photographs, several envelopes, a folded mountain map, and 3 sheets covered with names in Samuel Hale's handwriting. Disappointment came before curiosity. No deed, she said. Elias crouched across from her, but kept his hands off the contents. Doesn't mean it's useless. I need something the county can actually use. Mara lifted the first photograph. It showed the cabin in winter, snow nearly reaching the porch steps. Another showed several cars parked farther down the mountain road. None was dated clearly enough to explain anything. She unfolded the map. Samuel had marked the cabin, the lower road, and several bends along the mountain track in pencil. Small crosses appeared beside 3 locations. But there was no explanation. What are these? Could be anything, Elias said. Don't guess when you can find out. Mara set the map aside and examined the sheets of names. There were 19 in all, some grouped by family. Several matched signatures she had already seen in the letters from beneath the fireplace. These people were here, she said. Elias studied the list from where he sat. Looks that way. 19 people, maybe. Mara looked around the cabin. 19 people could barely have fit inside. The thought changed the room again. She imagined bodies packed around the fireplace, wet coats hanging from nails, frightened children sleeping wherever there was floor space. But imagining was not knowing. The next morning, once the mountain road was usable, Mara brought copies of the names to Ruth Calder at the library. Ruth adjusted her glasses and ran a finger down the list. Some of these families are gone from the county, she said. Some might still be around. They spent hours searching old directories, newspaper indexes, and public records. Several trails ended with obituaries. Others led to people who had moved decades earlier. Near midday, Ruth stopped at one name. Margaret Voss. I remember this family. Ruth searched again. Margaret was a child in 1994. Can we find her? Possibly. They eventually located a current telephone listing. Mara stared at the number. Finding old paper had felt safe. Calling a living person did not. What do I say? The truth, Ruth replied, and give her the choice not to talk. Mara used the library phone. A woman answered after 4 rings. Hello? Is this Margaret Voss? Yes. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm calling about Samuel Hale. Silence. Mara thought the call had dropped. Then Margaret whispered, Samuel, I found your name among some papers at his cabin. Another silence, followed by a shaky breath. You're at the cabin. I bought it recently. Is it still standing? Barely. Margaret gave a small laugh that broke halfway through. When she spoke again, she was crying. I haven't heard that name in years. Mara glanced at Ruth. I found letters people sent him after a blizzard in 1994. I'm trying to understand what happened. Your family. His granddaughter. Margaret inhaled slowly. Then somebody should have told you. She described traveling through the mountains with her parents when the weather turned far faster than expected. Snow erased the road. Their car slid off near a bend and became stuck. Her father tried to walk for help, but returned because visibility was almost nothing. Margaret remembered her mother wrapping coats around her and telling her not to sleep. Then Samuel came, she said. He found your car. He found us. How? I don't know. I was a little girl. I remember a flashlight through the snow and my father shouting. Samuel helped them leave the car and reach the cabin. Margaret remembered the fireplace more clearly than anything else, the heat hurting her fingers as feeling returned to them. Her mother crying, Samuel bringing blankets. Were you the family who wrote that you wouldn't have survived? Mara asked. My father wrote that letter. Mara looked at the list. There are 19 names here. Marge became quiet. We weren't the only ones. How many people were in the cabin I couldn't tell you exactly. People kept arriving. Arriving on their own, not all of them. Mara waited. But Margaret did not explain further. By midnight, she finally said, there was barely room to sit. Mara looked around the quiet library, imagining the ruined cabin filled wall to wall with stranded strangers. What did Samuel do? He kept us warm, Margaret said, and he kept going back out. Before Mara could ask where, Margaret said she was tired. Mara thanked her and promised not to call again unless Margaret wanted her to. Mara, Margaret said before hanging up, your grandfather was a good man. Mara returned the receiver slowly. Those words stayed with her all afternoon on the ride back up the mountain with Elias. She told him about Margaret, but did not push him to add anything. For once, he volunteered. Memories get smaller when people who carry them disappear. That why Samuel saved the letters? Maybe he knew paper lasts longer. At the cabin, Mara found an envelope wedged beneath the photographs in the canvas bundle. Inside were 2 more letters describing the same storm from different angles, a man thanking Samuel for giving his coat to someone who had lost theirs, and a woman remembering children sleeping beside the hearth. No one described the full night. Each letter answered something and opened another question. Mara was reading the second when Scout barked at the window. A vehicle had stopped below the cabin. Mara stepped onto the porch and saw a county delivery driver climbing the path with an envelope. Mara Ellison? Yes. He handed it over and left. The return address belonged to an attorney in town. Inside was a formal notice stating that Vanessa Ellison, as Daniel Ellison's surviving spouse and representative of interests connected to his estate, disputed Mara's assumption that any documents or property originating with Claire automatically belonged solely to Mara. The language was cautious. Not a court order, but the message was clear. Vanessa was no longer arguing over the phone. Mara read it twice, then carried it inside. She really did it, she said. Elias read only the first paragraph before returning the paper. Don't panic because somebody paid a lawyer to write a letter. What if she's right? Then you find facts. And if she isn't, same answer. Mara placed the notice beside the torn transfer document. She had letters proving Samuel lived here, people who remembered him, and a document suggesting Claire had been given ownership. What she did not have was the complete deed. Scout lay beside the fireplace while Mara unfolded Samuel's mountain map again. She studied the pencil marks under the brighter light from the cleaned window. This time she noticed handwriting along the bottom edge, partly hidden beneath a fold. She flattened the paper. The sentence was short. If Claire ever needs proof, it stays where the fire can't take it. Mara read it aloud. Elias turned toward the fireplace. Mara did too. Her eyes settled on the hearth where Scout had uncovered the tin box. The letters had survived there, but they had been exposed to soot, heat, and damp air. Samuel's message could not be describing that cavity. Mara slowly stood. "We looked under the fireplace," she said. Elias stared at the stonework rising behind the flames. Mara followed his gaze and understood. They had been looking in the wrong place. Mara stood in front of the fireplace long after the fire had been reduced to glowing coals. The sentence from Samuel's map lay open on the table behind her. If Claire ever needs proof, it stays where the fire can't take it. Elias studied the stonework from several angles, then crouched and ran his fingers along the mortar joints beside the firebox. "If he meant this literally," Mara said, "where would you hide paper near a fireplace without burning it?" "Not under the hearth," Elias tapped the stone near the back wall, "and not anywhere exposed to the flue. So old fireplaces sometimes had dead spaces around the firebox. Depends how this one was built." Mara looked at the heavy stones rising toward the chimney. "You're saying there could be another cavity?" "I'm saying we don't start knocking holes into a wall because of one sentence on a map." Scout sat nearby, watching them as if disappointed that neither had begun digging. Elias spent nearly half an hour examining the masonry. He showed Mara how the firebox was built inside a larger stone structure, with an air gap separating portions of the outer wall from direct flame. "Heat travels," he said, "but this section would stay cooler than the hearth itself." Mara touched the stone he indicated. "How do we know if there's space behind it?" Elias handed her the screwdriver. "Tap." She did. Most stones answered with a dense, solid sound. Near the lower right side of the firebox, one responded differently. Not as hollow as the hearthstone Scout had uncovered, but duller than the others. Mara tapped it again. "There," Elias nodded. "Could be a repair. Could be nothing. You always this encouraging? Keeps people from falling in love with guesses." They waited until the remaining embers were cold before working. Removing the stone without damaging the structure took patience. Elias loosened only the first edge, then made Mara scrape the old mortar herself. "You really never do anything the easy way, do you?" she asked. "Easy way would be me doing it. Useful way is you knowing how." Mara kept scraping. Her arms began to ache. Dust coated her sleeves and hair. Scout sneezed and retreated to the opposite side of the room. After nearly an hour, the first stone shifted. Behind it was solid mortar. Mara's heart sank. Nothing. One stone isn't a wall. They worked on the next, then another. The opening slowly widened enough for Elias to shine a flashlight inside. "There's a gap." Mara moved beside him. Behind the firebox, protected by an outer layer of stone, was a narrow vertical compartment. "Where the fire can't take it," she whispered. Elias did not answer. Mara reached toward the opening, but he stopped her. "Edges first. Loose stone can cut you." He inspected the cavity, removed a broken chip of mortar, then nodded. Mara slid her hand inside. Her fingers brushed dust, then fabric. "There's something here." She reached farther and caught hold of a wrapped bundle. It resisted at first, wedged behind the masonry. Elias held the flashlight while Mara worked it loose inch by inch. Finally, an oilcloth packet emerged from the compartment. Unlike the canvas bundle from the woodshed, this one was dry. The wrapping had darkened with age, but remained tightly folded. Mara carried it to the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a legal document folded into thirds. She recognized the format immediately from the torn paper she had already found. At the top were Samuel Hale's name, a parcel description, and a date. Below that, the document stated that Samuel Hale transferred ownership of the mountain property and cabin to Claire Hale. Mara stopped breathing for a second. It's the deed. Elias leaned closer, but did not touch it. Looks like one. Mara scanned the page. There were signatures. Samuel's, Claire's, a witness line, a notary seal, faded but visible. The property description matched the parcel number on her county paperwork. She retrieved the torn page from the tin box and placed it beside the deed. Some phrases matched exactly. This is what the other piece came from. Elias nodded. Or a copy of the same transfer. Mara looked at him. Does this prove it belonged to Mom? It proves Samuel intended to transfer it. Whether the county accepts it as valid is another question. The warning dampened her excitement, but did not erase it. For the first time, she held something complete. Not a damaged article, not a memory, not a stranger's letter. A full document with names and signatures. Vanessa said, Dad thought the cabin should have gone to me. Mara swallowed. Maybe he knew this existed. Elias's expression softened. Maybe. Mara looked back at the deed. You knew Samuel better than you've admitted. Elias turned toward the empty fireplace. I knew enough. Why do you always stop there? He remained silent for several seconds, because what Samuel did that night isn't my story to make bigger or smaller. But you were here afterward. Yes. And you keep coming back. Elias stared at the stonework. Some debts don't feel paid just because time passes. Mara waited. But he offered nothing more. She did not press. Instead, she returned to the oilcloth. Beneath the deed was a smaller envelope, sealed and yellowed. Claire's name was written across the front in Samuel's handwriting. For Claire, if you ever come home. Mara hesitated before opening it. The letter inside was short. Samuel wrote that he had never wanted the cabin to become a burden. He apologized if the mountain had made Claire feel trapped by other people's memories. He said he understood why she left. Then came the line that stopped Mara completely. A house only matters when someone inside it needs shelter. Mara read it again. The cabin around her was still cold, damaged, and barely livable. Yet those words made it feel more solid than anything Vanessa had ever called home. Samuel ended by telling Claire that ownership was hers whether she chose to return or not. Mara turned the page over. More writing continued on the back. Near the bottom, Samuel had added one final note about the deed. If there is ever a question, Mara read aloud, Thomas Avery can testify to the signing. He witnessed it himself. Elias looked up sharply. Mara stared at the name for the first time. The paper in her hands did not merely point backward. It pointed to someone who might still be able to prove the deed was real. Ruth Calder found Thomas Avery before noon the next day. She called Mara from the library and told her the former notary was 86 and living in an assisted living home less than an hour away. I spoke with the administrator, Ruth said. Mr. Avery is willing to meet you, but don't expect too much. It's been decades. Mara looked at Samuel's letter on the table. If he remembers the signing, that's enough. Elias drove her down the mountain. Mara carried the original deed inside a rigid folder Ruth had given her, along with Samuel's note naming Thomas as witness. Scout remained at the cabin. The assisted living home smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Thomas Avery was waiting beside a window overlooking a snow-covered courtyard. He was thin, with white hair and hands marked by age, but his eyes sharpened when Mara placed Samuel's letter before him. "Samuel Hale," Thomas said. "You remember him? Everybody who lived up that mountain did." Mara carefully unfolded the deed. Thomas leaned forward. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he pointed to the witness line. "That's mine." Mara felt her shoulders loosen. "You're sure?" "I signed enough documents to know my own signature." He examined the faded notary seal. "And that was my seal." "So Samuel really transferred the cabin to Claire?" "Yes." Thomas looked at Mara. "Who are you?" "Claire's daughter." His expression softened. "Then Samuel finally got his wish?" Mara wanted to ask what that meant, but she stayed with the question that had brought her there. "Would you be willing to confirm that the deed was signed legally if somebody needs me to? Vanessa, my stepmother, is questioning whether it belongs to me." Thomas frowned. "I can't tell you what a court will decide, but I can tell you Samuel signed this in front of me, and Claire accepted it. That part happened." It was the first unambiguous confirmation Mara had received. She glanced at Elias, but he was staring through the window. Mara thanked Thomas, then asked about the letters beneath the fireplace. "People wrote that Samuel saved them during the blizzard." Thomas nodded slowly. "That was a terrible night. Margaret Voss told me her family got stranded. She said Samuel kept going back outside." "He did?" Thomas looked toward Elias. "You haven't told her." Elias's jaw tightened. "Wasn't my story." Thomas gave him a long look. "Some of it is." Mara turned toward Elias. "What does that mean?" Elias did not answer. Thomas did. Samuel didn't just open his door. He went looking for people. He described the storm as he remembered it. Snow came faster than forecasts predicted. Vehicles became trapped along the mountain road before anyone could reach the lower highway. Samuel knew the bends and drop-offs better than most. When he realized people were stranded, he tied rope around his waist, carried a flashlight, and went into the whiteout. 3 times. Thomas said he went out 3 times, alone for much of it. Why? Thomas looked surprised by the question. "Because people were out there?" The simplicity of the answer silenced Mara. Thomas remembered hearing afterward that Samuel nearly failed to return on his final trip. By then the cabin was already crowded with stranded motorists. He could have stayed inside. Mara said, "Yes, but he didn't." That was Samuel on the drive back. Elias remained unusually quiet. Mara did not ask again. At the library, Ruth was waiting with something spread across a table. I found another copy. It was the complete newspaper article from February 1994, retrieved through an archive outside the county. The missing section described stranded motorists being sheltered at a private mountain cabin while road crews struggled through the blizzard. Samuel Hale's name appeared twice. Beneath the article was a list of people reported safe after the storm. Mara traced the names with her finger. Several matched Samuel's handwritten list. Margaret Voss, her parents, other names from the letters. Then Mara stopped. Elias Boone, age 35. Mara looked across the table. Elias stared at the article. "You were there." Ruth quietly moved away. Elias pulled out a chair, but did not sit. "My truck slid into a ditch about a mile below the cabin. Samuel found you on his last trip." Mara remembered Thomas saying Samuel almost did not return. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want what I owed him to become the reason you trusted me." "You've been bringing me wood, fixing things, driving me everywhere." "Helping you fix things," Elias corrected. You've done most of the work, because of Samuel Elias finally sat. He found me half frozen beside that truck. I'd made the stupid decision to get out and walk. Lost direction almost immediately. He got me back here, and that's why you came up before the storm? I saw someone heading towards Samuel's old cabin with weather coming in. Elias rubbed a hand across his face. I couldn't ignore that. Mara looked at the name on the article again. You said some debts don't feel paid. They don't. For the first time, Mara understood that Elias had not been protecting a secret. He had been carrying gratitude. She reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. You don't owe me what you owed him. Elias nodded. Maybe not. Still going to make sure you learn how to fix that roof. Mara smiled through the pressure behind her eyes. Ruth returned with copies of the article and a written record of Thomas's contact information. She had also spoken with the county clerk about the deed, the original document, Samuel's note, Thomas's confirmation, and the supporting historical records were enough to begin correcting the broken ownership chain. It would require formal paperwork, but for the first time, the evidence strongly supported Claire's ownership and Mara's succession as Claire's daughter. Vanessa can still make noise, Ruth said, but you can't make this deed disappear. Mara carried the folder back to the cabin as evening settled over the mountain. Scout met them at the porch. Mara knelt and wrapped both arms around him. You started all this, you know? Scout licked her chin. An hour later, headlights appeared through the trees. Mara expected another county delivery. Instead, a familiar car stopped near the bottom of the track. Vanessa stepped out. Mara's body stiffened. Elias rose from his chair, but Mara shook her head. I'll handle it. Vanessa climbed the path alone. She looked exhausted rather than angry. In one hand she carried a sealed envelope. What are you doing here? Mara asked. Vanessa looked past her at the repaired window, the stacked wood, and the smoke rising steadily from the chimney. I came to give you something. She held out the envelope. Mara did not take it immediately. The handwriting across the front made her heart stop. It was Daniel's. Her father had written her name in the careful block letters she remembered from birthday cards and school permission slips. Where did you get this? Mara whispered. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the envelope. Your father left it with his papers. How long have you had it? Vanessa looked away. Since he died. Mara finally took the envelope. Why didn't you give it to me? Vanessa met her eyes. Whatever answer she had brought seemed difficult to say. Instead, she nodded toward the letter in Mara's hands. Your father wanted you to have this when you turned 18. Mara held the envelope without opening it. Daniel's handwriting made the cabin around her seem to disappear. For a moment, she was 16 again, watching her father write grocery lists at the kitchen table, tapping the pen against his thumb whenever he forgot something. Then Vanessa shifted on the porch, and the present returned. You had this since he died? Mara asked. Vanessa nodded. He kept it with papers from Claire. And you waited until now? I didn't know what was in it. You knew it had my name on it. Vanessa flinched. Yes, Mara wanted to shout, but anger felt almost too small for what she was holding. Why? Vanessa looked toward the trees. After Daniel died, I was angry at everything he left behind. Bills, boxes, the house. His plans for you. So you kept my letter? Yes. And then you threw me out. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Yes. No excuse followed. Mara appreciated that more than she wanted to. She stepped inside and opened the envelope beside the fireplace. Daniel's letter was only 2 pages. He wrote that if Mara was reading it on or after her 18th birthday, he hoped he had already explained the mountain cabin himself. If he had not, his illness had taken more time than he expected. He told her the cabin had belonged to Claire's father, Samuel Hale, and that Samuel had transferred it to Claire years before Mara was born. After Claire died, Daniel discovered problems with unpaid taxes and incomplete county records. He had intended to clear them, but medical expenses and worsening health kept pushing the work aside. One sentence blurred before Mara's eyes. "Your mother never wanted the mountain to become an obligation for you, but I believe the cabin should have gone to you someday. If you wanted it." Mara wiped her cheek with her sleeve. Daniel had known, but he had not been hiding the cabin to keep it from her. He had been trying, unsuccessfully, to repair a problem before handing it to her. At the bottom he had written, "Whatever you decide, kiddo, remember that a home should never be something you have to earn from people who love you." Mara stopped there. Vanessa stood in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she said. Mara folded the letter carefully. "For which part?" Vanessa's face tightened. "Keeping that, making you leave." "Telling myself you were 18 so I didn't have to feel guilty about it." Mara looked at her. A week ago she might have wanted an apology desperately enough to accept anything. Now she understood that hearing sorry did not erase sleeping in a freezing car or watching a door lock behind her. "I'm not ready to forgive you." Vanessa nodded. "I know. And the attorney, I'll tell him I'm not contesting the documents." Mara steadied her, uncertain whether relief or anger should come first. "Why?" Vanessa looked around the cabin. "Because Daniel clearly wanted you to have whatever clan Claire had, and because I should have given you that letter before I did anything else." It was not reconciliation. It was simply truth arriving late. For now, Mara could live with that. Vanessa left before dark. The following days brought the pieces together. Ruth helped organize copies of the deed, Samuel's letter, Daniel's letter, and the newspaper article. Thomas Avery provided confirmation that he had witnessed the deed signing. The county process was not magically finished overnight, but the central question no longer seemed uncertain. Samuel had transferred the property to Claire, and Mara was Claire's daughter and heir. The $5 auction had led Mara to a cabin her family had already been trying to pass down to her, but the ownership was only half of what she had found. Ruth contacted Margaret again with Mara's permission, and the surviving accounts finally formed a fuller picture of February 1994. Snow had begun in the afternoon and turned violent before dark. Cars on the mountain road became trapped faster than emergency crews could reach them. Samuel saw the first headlights stop moving below his property and went out carrying rope, blankets, and a flashlight. He returned with a family. Then he learned there were more vehicles farther down. He went back. By the second trip, the wind was strong enough to erase footprints within minutes. More stranded people reached the cabin. Some were soaked. One man had injured his ankle. Children were shivering so badly they could barely hold cups. Samuel gave them blankets, dry clothes, and every spare place near the fireplace. Then he went outside a third time. That was when he found Elias. Elias sat beside Mara's fireplace while Ruth read portions of the recovered accounts aloud. He spoke only when the written record could not. "I'd left my truck," he said. "Worst decision I could have made. I thought I knew the road well enough to walk it blind." "Samuel found you before you froze," Mara said. Elias nodded. "He was almost as cold as I was by then." When Samuel returned with Elias and the last stranded motorists, the cabin was packed. 19 people crowded into rooms built for perhaps 4. Wet clothing hung from chairs. Children slept on the floor beside the hearth. The fire consumed the woodpile faster than Samuel had expected. When the split logs ran low, he broke apart damaged furniture and carried usable boards from the woodshed. "The woodshed," Mara said softly. Elias nodded. "Part of why it was already rough years later." Samuel kept the fire alive until crews reached the mountain after daylight. No one sheltering inside the cabin died. The letters hidden beneath the hearth had arrived afterward, families thanking him, parents describing children who would have frozen in their cars. People trying to put into words what one open door had meant on the worst night of their lives. Samuel had never displayed them. He had simply kept them. Mara looked at his photograph above the table. Suddenly his sentence to Claire meant something larger. A house only matters when someone inside it needs shelter. That evening, after Ruth and Elias left, Mara sat alone with Scout before the fireplace. She thought about Samuel opening this door to strangers, Claire leaving because she feared being defined by the mountain, Daniel trying to preserve a choice for his daughter. Then Mara thought about arriving here with $18 left, convinced she had bought the cabin only because $5 was cheaper than a motel. Scout rested his head on her boot. "Funny place for someone homeless to end up," she whispered. 2 days later, Mara received a different kind of letter. A local buyer had heard about the parcel and offered to purchase the mountain property as is. The amount on the page was more money than Mara had ever personally possessed. Enough for an apartment deposit, a reliable used car, food, and a clean beginning somewhere easier. She walked onto the porch with the offer. The repaired chimney sent smoke into a pale winter sky. Behind her, the fireplace crackled steadily. Selling would be sensible. Nobody could blame an 18-year-old girl for choosing security over a broken cabin on a difficult mountain road. Mara looked at the number again, then back at the house Samuel had once refused to close against a storm. For the first time since Vanessa had locked her out, Mara had a choice about where she belonged. And now she had to make it. Mara kept the buyer's offer on the table overnight. By morning, she had read the number enough times that it no longer looked real. Scout sat beside her while she folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "We could leave," she told him. Scout tilted his hand. "Apartment with actual heat, roads that don't disappear under snow, maybe even a car that starts." His tail tapped once against the floor. Mara looked toward the fireplace. The repaired chimney drew cleanly now, and a small fire warmed the room. Samuel's photograph rested nearby. For most of her life, Mara had thought security meant finding something nobody could take away. But the cabin had taught her something different. Samuel had possessed this place, and still believed its greatest value came from opening it to others. Mara took out her phone and called the number on the offer. "Thank you," she said when the buyer answered. "But I'm not selling." Saying it frightened her. It also felt right. The cabin did not transform overnight. Spring arrived slowly in the Appalachian Mountains, revealing every repair winter had hidden. Mara found temporary work in town and spent what she could spare on materials. Elias taught her how to replace damaged boards and identify roof sections that could wait from those that could not. As promised, he never simply did the work for her. "Hammer higher," he said one morning from the ladder beside her. "I am hammering higher. You're attacking the nail sideways. It knows what it did." Elias laughed. By summer, Mara could patch siding, replace window trim, stack firewood properly, and recognize when the chimney needed attention. The cabin remained old. It was supposed to. She was repairing it, not erasing it. Ruth helped preserve Samuel's letters in archival sleeves and made copies so the originals would not need to be handled. Margaret Voss mailed Mara a photograph taken months after the 1994 storm. Margaret stood between her parents, smiling in front of their car. On the back, she had written, "For Samuel's granddaughter. We got to grow older because he opened his door." Mara placed the photograph near Samuel's, but she kept Daniel's letter in a drawer beside her bed. That one belonged somewhere private. Vanessa returned once near the end of summer. She brought 2 boxes from Daniel's belongings. His old watch, several photographs, a flannel shirt Mara remembered stealing when she was 14, and small things that would have meant nothing to anyone else. Vanessa set them on the porch. "There are more if you want them." "I do." Neither woman mentioned forgiveness. Vanessa looked toward the repaired roof. "You've done a lot. Still a lot left. Daniel would have liked it." Mara felt the familiar ache, but this time it did not knock the breath from her. "I think so too." Vanessa left after 10 minutes. Mara did not hug her. She also did not watch her go with hatred. Some relationships could not be repaired by pretending the damage had never happened. Mara was learning that boundaries could be a kind of peace. The legal process moved more slowly than the repairs. Thomas Avery's statement, the original deed, Samuel's note, Daniel's records, and the surviving county documents were reviewed together. Vanessa withdrew her challenge, as promised. Eventually, the corrected ownership record arrived by mail. Mara opened it at the kitchen table with Elias and Ruth present. Scout rested beneath the table. The name on the document read Mara Claire Ellison. Mara traced the middle name with one finger. Claire. Her mother had spent years trying not to let the mountain define her, yet she had still carried Samuel's love away with her. Daniel had tried to protect Mara's right to choose. Now Mara finally had that choice in writing. "Well," Elias asked. Mara looked up. "It's mine." Ruth smiled. "It always should have been." Mara shook her head gently. "Not exactly." She glanced around the cabin. "I think I had to choose it too." By autumn, the heating system worked again, though Mara still preferred the fireplace on cold evenings. She found steadier work in town and bought an inexpensive used car after months of saving. Nothing about her life became luxurious. Bills still arrived, the mountain road still demanded caution, the cabin still produced new repairs whenever Mara believed she had finished the old ones. But those problems no longer felt like proof that her life was collapsing. They were simply things that needed doing. Winter returned almost a year after Mara had first climbed the mountain with $18 left in her pocket. One evening, snow began falling steadily across the ridge. Not a blizzard like Samuel's, but enough for Mara to check the weather radio and bring extra wood inside. Scout, now grayer around the muzzle, slept near the hearth. Mara was making tea when barking pulled her toward the door. "What is it?" Scout stood facing the window. Through the snow, Mara saw faint headlights below the cabin. She grabbed her coat and flashlight. A car had slid partly off the mountain track near a shallow ditch. An older couple stood beside it. Frightened but unhurt. "Are you okay?" Mara called. "We think so," the man answered. "We took the wrong road." The woman was shivering. Mara looked at the snow accumulating around their tires. Getting the car free could wait until morning. "Come with me." "We don't want to impose," the woman said. "You're not." Mara led them up the path. Scout greeted them at the porch, suspicious for only a moment before wagging his tail. Inside, the woman held her hands toward the fireplace while her husband repeatedly apologized. Mara gave them towels, hot tea, and blankets. "We can pay you for the trouble," he said. "No. At least let us give you something." Mara glanced at Samuel's photograph above the mantel. Beside it was Margaret's photograph, and beneath them, safely framed, was a copy of the deed Scout's digging had eventually led her to uncover. "You really don't have to apologize," Mara said. "This is what this place is for." The couple did not understand why the words mattered so much. They did not need to. Later, after they had settled near the fire, Mara stepped onto the porch. Snow softened the forest and covered the scars in the old mountain track. Through the window she could see Scout stretched in front of the hearth, exactly where he had scratched at a loose stone on their first night. Mara remembered the auctioneer laughing at her $5 bid. She remembered Vanessa locking the door. She remembered sleeping in a dead Subaru with $23 and believing that belonging was something another person could revoke. The cabin had not rescued her because it was secretly worth a fortune. There had been no gold beneath the fireplace, no hidden wealth waiting to erase every hardship. What Scout had found was proof of something harder to price: a grandfather who had opened his door when strangers had nowhere else to go. A mother who had been allowed to leave without losing her place in the family, and a father who had tried to preserve that same choice for his daughter. Mara went back inside and added another log to the fire. Scout opened one eye, then rested his head again. The flames brightened beneath the old stones. Samuel's photograph caught the warm light. Mara looked at the framed deed once more. For months she had thought it mattered because it proved the cabin belonged to her. Now she understood it differently. It proved she had inherited a place. What she chose to do with that place was the legacy. Outside, the snow continued falling over the Appalachian Mountains. Inside, strangers were warm. Scout slept beside the fireplace, and Mara kept the fire burning.